Namaskar. Today is June 28th, Monday, and welcome to Daily Global Insights with Sree and Sree, episode 191. In global news, the US conducts airstrikes against Iran-backed militias in the Iran or Iraq-Syria border, targeting sites responsible for drone attacks in a sign of a clear message to Iran. Sridharji, this is something that just happened just a few hours ago, isn't it?
It is. I think it's happened here, late Sunday evening. And it's the breaking news was overnight, which is to say that the attack, usually there is a time delay, you don't get this real time. But what is significant is that we have been talking about these attacks coming into the Iraqi air base, into the to the US troops stationed in the Ibril region, closer to the Syrian border, etc. So thus far, I think U.S. has had exercised restraint, and then they went after, and especially targeting two specific groups, which is the Kaitab Hezbollah and Kaitab Saeed Shuhada. They're supposed to be the two groups. F-15s and F-16s seems to have been used, and they targeted three specific sites. At least one site is destroyed. So I think it's a compelling sign, which is to say, look, while we negotiate with you for peace, we're not going to allow, your space being utilized to target our U.S. forces.
And Iran says that nuclear site images will no longer be shared with IAEA as the deal has expired. And Foreign Minister Yair Lapid of Israel will be meeting with American, Italian, Bahraini counterparts in Rome followed by a visit to the UAE. So the new government in Israel is starting to do all its diplomacy, sir.
They're going around and they're doing the diplomacy, and they're making the case very clear that there is no change in policy. They have been accommodative in terms of the various constituents that make up the government, but there is no room for slackening in terms of its approach as Iran is concerned. Or the national security is concerned. Doesn't matter whether it is Gaza or Palestine or whether there are Iranian issues, their position remains the same. I think that will be a very clear message from the president himself. In fact, President warned Biden not to continue discussions because it will be counterproductive. So I think that this is now the diplomatic message that is going around with the new administration coming into place.
And Jaish-ul-Hind, a terror organization believed to be associated with Iran, took responsibility for the Israeli embassy bombing, and 4 students have been arrested. So this, which embassy was this, sir, that it got bombed?
New Delhi embassy. The New Delhi.
Oh, I see. A couple of years ago. Right.
Yes. It's the New Delhi embassy. That is. The fact is that it has taken this long. I think Israel was involved in the investigations. It was fairly clear that it has to be, Iranian-backed groups in India which were involved. There's no surprise. As it turns out, now they have specific arrests that been. The fact is, India seems to be, you look at, you have every type. You have Chinese sympathizers, Pakistani sympathizers. Then you have the Iranian, you have the Turkish, pretty much everybody seem to be there, and they can be triggered to unleash damage. But I'm glad that at least they made some progress in arrests, and this wouldn't have been possible, without also the support of the Israelis.
And viewers, we are pleased to announce that we have one sponsor for our daily global insights, and that is Cowcoin. Cowcoin USA is a cryptocurrency that is aimed towards solving specific needs of 3 sectors: education, entertainment, and healthcare. Stay tuned as we bring more news about this. So moving on, sir, let's take a look at what is happening with Afghanistan. What is the future for Afghanistan after the US-Afghanistan withdrawal? The prospects of Iran, Turkey, Pakistan takeover loom large. Afghan peace talk should continue unless the Taliban themselves pull out, said Mr. Abdullah after their meeting with the US president. He and Afghan President Ashraf Ghani met Mr. Biden and discuss the security arrangements. There's more. There are reports that Taliban is planning a takeover with the imminent fall of the government in 6 months after the withdrawal. So Taliban has been, planning all along to take over again Afghanistan. So this was the 9/11 movement is the one that drove them out of power. So it looks like they want to come back to the 20 years later.
They never were out of power. I think that they were hanging around Afghanistan. They controlled few provinces, which even United States, did not attempt to, take charge of. There's been constant and sporadic attacks, but persistent attacks around the civilian infrastructure, around the security infrastructure, around the diplomatic enclaves. So it's, there's been constant and consistent turmoil that has prevailed over these 2 decades of U.S. footprint and the U.S. and NATO footprint in the region. But this cannot go on, so sooner or later people have to the forces have to be withdrawn, and the Afghans must take over and shape the way of their government, as well as the way they're going to manage the security as well as the administration of the country. It's very clear that notwithstanding all the training and facilities that's provided, the Afghan forces are ill-equipped to deal with this guerrilla commando style, fighting that comes with the Taliban. I think the other interesting part for you is what's going to be the role of India, China, and Russia in this because of various geopolitical reasons. Then you have the Islamic nations, Iran, Turkey, and Pakistan. What is their role in taking a grip? It looks like that there is a problem both on the Turkish front with the Taliban. So Taliban is saying, we don't need any of you. It's our country, and we're going to take charge. The very fact that Mr. Abdullah, during the Friday, post the Friday meeting with Mr. Biden, made the statement, look, we'll continue to negotiate, but if Taliban doesn't want to be part of the negotiations, there's nothing that one can do, and it'll lead to its own eventual course. So that's almost like a resignation rather than the acceptance of a new horizon.
And Indonesia and the United States are going to build a maritime center at the mouth of Malacca. The facility in Batam will bolster security in the region located at the strategic intersection of South China Sea and Malacca Strait. In Hong Kong, security chief named number 2 official amid clampdown and shutdown of democratic institutions. The Delta variant cases rise across Asia, led by Taiwan. Australian cities of Darwin and Sydney are under lockdown now. Sir, I regret to inform you that I'm not able to bring that picture up. I didn't have time to set it up. So we'll have to talk to the picture that you have on your side about where this camp is coming up between Batam is going to be between US and Indonesia.
But if you can imagine the Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia map, which is almost like, two islands, not little islands, 2 islands on a narrow strip, separated by the Malaccan Straits, right at the tip, which is around, past Singapore, right at the tip of the Malaccan Strait is the Batam Island. So the Batam Island has now become, which is Indonesian. Part of the land was also acquired by Singapore, and they are doing an industrial development park around the Batam.
Sir, I got it up, sir, now. Please continue.
Yeah. So people can see where Batam is, and it's fairly well known to people especially in Southeast Asia. But what is strategic, what is important is that it is right at that point where there is a training facility being developed between United States to train the Indonesian Navy, in terms of the combat as well as naval capabilities. The location is very strategic. It's Malacca Strait and South China Sea entry point. Both are under contention, which is South China Sea is under contention by the Chinese. And Chinese have always had an aspiration, because a lot of trade also flows to the Malaccan Strait. They've also been interested in either forming a partnership with Indonesia or forming a partnership with Malaysia. But all the nations have preserved their independence and making sure that the Malaccan Strait is not blocked. So I think it's a strategic location, and it also reflects U.S. policy of divide and establish. Just very similar to Japan, very similar to Taiwan, very similar to what they're doing with Philippines. You are now beginning to see with Indonesia, they are building this capability.
And Tanzania to revive a $10 billion Indian Ocean port project with China, the strategic importance of Dar es Salaam. The Tanzanian government is also insisting on Bagamoyo port due to high congestion in Dar es Salaam. And 12 German soldiers were wounded in attack on UN base in Mali. Sir, I'm putting up the first of the many pictures about where we are talking about Dar es Salaam and the Bagamoyo. Viewers, you can see that on your screen now. Please go ahead, sir.
Right. I think before I transition, I forgot to mention John Lee has become, who was a police chief, has become the number two. He becomes the chief secretary. It just reflects the Chinese approach in terms of how they want to put any contempt, any protests down. And the police chief is now the chief secretary, and they moved a security person as the head of the police. I think his name is Chris. Chris is Chris Tong is the police chief, and John Lee becomes the chief secretary. It's a reflection of the Chinese taking hold over the Hong Kong in terms of suppressing the democratic any dissent that comes through. Coming to Dar es Salaam, you are putting up various pictures. The objective of putting these various pictures, Dar es Salaam has now emerged. Africa, you remember that there has been constant forays. This is one more. We have covered various areas. We have covered Taiwan Strait. We have covered, South China Sea. We have covered Malacca Strait. We have covered. So now we are coming to the Chinese we have covered the Himalayan region. We have covered Tibet from a Chinese point of view. Now we're coming into the Africa. We already touched and covered just above Somalia, the Djibouti Gulf of Aden, which is again another strategic right around Yemen, strategic point, which is all the countries are present in that part, entering into the Indian Ocean from, which is a passage for a large volume of trade. Again, Somalia has remained, with the pirates, the Somalia has remained constantly in use. Now we go down further, you have Dar es Salaam. Now, Dar es Salaam, if one looks at the maps that are being shown, there's the first map which shows that you have where Dar es Salaam is, and adjacent to that is Bagamoyo. Both are connects into the inland Africa. Now, once you enter these points, then it's a straight. You can travel to vast network of roads which connects these two strategic ports into Africa. Dar es Salaam, the Tanzanian government is saying that's good, but it is a high point of congestion. So let us go to Bagamoyo, because in Bagamoyo we can go north and south much easier rather than being congested. But the Chinese are still saying we'll do this and we'll do that. That's a very interesting approach that the Chinese have taken. Those are the two maps that. Then you have a third map, which is namely the African map. The African map shows where the Tanzania is located, how many countries in Africa can be interconnected. That's the message from the third map. The last map is the Asia, Indonesia, Africa view. Sorry, Asia, Africa view of the map, which connects the Pacific and the Indian Ocean, and the location of China. As you can see, Dar es Salaam, when you go below Sri Lanka on the Indian Ocean, you have a straight passage through South China Sea into China, right? So therefore, this is of a strategic importance to China to complete its Belt and Road Initiative. By the way, the Belt and Road Initiative, Dar es Salaam route, is an integral part of the Belt and Road Initiative. So they are getting, they are strengthening their positions. It's not just one point. They keep coming up in various strategic locations, as the entry points. We have covered Europe, we have covered Greece, we have covered Germany as to why those ports were important to China. Now you can see we are covering the Dar es Salaam and the African region. The one other thing before we get transition out of the global news is the incidents in Mali. We had already covered and introduced to the daily global insights audiences the importance of the Sahel region and where the violence is the new group of terrorist activities coming up. Most recent, this death of these 12 soldiers representing the German nation, part of the UN force, is in Mali, which is right adjacent to that Burkina Faso, Niger, Algiers, which is the starting point of the Sahel region. So it's obviously disturbances which caused those casualties.
And Italy rejects Chinese COVID-19 vaccines as China admits that they are less effective against variants. And Russia mandates vaccines as coronavirus cases rise there also. So there are countries like Australia and perhaps some in Asia and in Europe that don't seem to have any vaccines at all. So you have a tremendous, asymmetry in terms of country to country. Things are changing, sir, and that should be a bit of a concern, is because normal trade cannot resume unless everywhere things come to a certain control, isn't it?
It is. I think that in this specific instance, I think we're talking about the Delta variant. If you take Australia that you mentioned, they have good supply. They're using Abbott Labs, and I think it's, if I'm correct, the Abbott Labs. They're using the AstraZeneca variant version. That is what is being used, very similar to the Covishield in India. So the vaccination drive is progressing very well, but nobody can stop these new variants that are coming in. Many of these old vaccines, such as Pfizer and Moderna and AstraZeneca, they are not yet ready for combating the Delta variants. Both, again, Russia had Sputnik, and the Sputnik doesn't seem to be having enough combative power to deal with variants. You are beginning to see the rise in cases in Russia as a result of that. So the key message is, be it in Vietnam, be it in Taiwan, be it in Japan, be it in Australia, be it in Russia, you are now beginning to see this COVID Delta variant creeping in and recreating the necessity for, again, social distancing, masks, etc., etc. So how exactly this variant will be dealt with is an interesting prospect as we move ahead. I am told that even Britain and is beginning to see high incidence. There's a concept of lockdown being talked about in Britain. Fortunately, the Covaxin in India seems to have a very high efficacy to combat this new variant that is looming even in India.
And in US news, China is manipulating the United States businesses to serve Beijing's interests. House GOP investigation finds. Sir, is this a private investigation carried out by a few members of the GOP, House members of the GOP, or is it something that is approved by the government? And I'm curious as to why the Democrats are not participating in this. After all, it is their country too. Your thoughts, sir?
It's a continuation of some of the work that was left from the last regime of President Trump. If you recall, Mike Pompeo had done extensive work, and he had made statements around how the educational institutions were perpetuated with Chinese sponsorship and Chinese endowment, including close collaboration that seems to have happened on the research side. How the student community is being engaged and influenced to push the Chinese narrative. So I think it's a continuation of that effort. So it is a House GOP effort. And I think they have continued and established the facts around, not just in the diplomacy, but also in the education. And now they are saying in sports, NBA is one of the sports which seem to have very strong linkage and sponsorship and viewership in China. So that seems to be compromised. You saw the situation in the MLB, Major League Baseball. The institutions, they have mentioned Apple, YouTube, to list a few, Facebook. They say that some of this Twitter, not Facebook, Twitter, some of these institutions are compromised, and they have even CCP execs either with allegiance or without allegiance sitting there and trying to influence the narrative. So this is the investigation that concludes what was being uttered during the last days, final days, where there was this talk about the Chinese interference in the election process.
And Biden clarifies and reaffirms his support for the bipartisan infrastructure plan, and he confirms again that he did not issue a veto threat. This as Republican senators threaten to walk out of the deal. But I think towards the end of the weekend, the White House said that it is absurd for GOP to oppose a two-track infrastructure plan. Joe Manchin of Democrats is also pitching for a repeal of Trump tax cuts of 1.5 trillion to fund the social spending deal. So I think the Republicans have got on board because they need 60 votes to pass this thing. I think it's like what, 943 billion, sir? Do you think more changes could be coming because once it's reconciled with the House, there could be more earmarks added? What are your thoughts, sir?
So I think this is going to be a three-step process. It also talks about how divided the Democratic Party is. You have progressives, you have Democrats, and then you have this, what you call the centrists like Joe Manchin. So there was this tiptoe between, did Biden approve? Did Biden kind of renegade his deal? Biden confirmed, no, the deal that I did with Republicans are on. So it's 943 billion. So that's done, and we'll try to get it through. Now, if the Democrats renege against that, so he needs to have something back in his pocket to make sure that he's able to get the progressive agenda done. So the House Democrats are saying, look, we are progressive, we have been fighting for this, and how you can go and strike a deal. For which, when GOP said two-track is not acceptable because there seems to have been rumors coming out to satisfy this Democratic Party constituents, that there would be what you call as the reconciliation process. The reconciliation doesn't need to get through the House and Senate. So there's a $4 trillion contemplated through the either $4 or $2 trillion contemplated through the reconciliation process. So therefore, what is not achieved in the 943 will be done through that the Republicans are opposing. Now then you overlay the $6 trillion budget, that with deficit of another $2 trillion that's likely to come in, then you have the triple whammy of the 943, then you have the 2 trillion reconciliation, then you have the 6 trillion deficit budget. Now, all these numbers add up. We are going to do the arithmetic, but we will do the arithmetic as a separate fireside chat once the numbers settle down. The budget plan is in a draft. It has not been approved, and more details are expected. Now, how do you fund all this? So Joe Manchin is saying, besides the increase in taxes that's contemplated, please make sure that the Trump regime tax cuts is reneged or reset. So you may be able to save not 1.5 trillion because it's been in vogue for about more than 3 years. And so, part of the bill those taxes will be reduced to fund this gigantic budget. So this is the whole, what you call as the potpourri of the United States budget and the fighting that is going on between various factions.
And we are headed for interesting times because I don't know if viewers have been following this, but Pramila Jayapal headed committee has initiated a move to break up the social media giants such as Facebook and Google and so on. On the one hand, they want them to fan the flames that they put out, and now they are going back and biting the hand that feeds. So your thoughts on where this is going to end? Will the big tech prevail and say, enough, you want our help or not, or what is going to happen, sir?
I think the way United States works is, unless there is an enforcement, it's a self-imposed law and self-imposed rule. So most of the U.S. businesses are disconnected or decoupled from the government policies of the U.S. government. So therefore, what the tech platforms will do, they will continue to run, they will continue to be summoned for inquiries and Senate briefings and House briefings, and they'll continue to run. They'll say, apologies, we'll try and put some reform programs in. Unless there is a forced maneuver, which I don't see the forced maneuver happening, you find this, what you call this, the present scenario of chaos and confusion and self-imposed rules of the tech platforms prevailing for a period of time. It's not that trivial to unwind these companies, which has become such behemoths. Even to unwind, it'll take probably 2, 3, 4 years, right? When I've done large bank mergers. Bank mergers take 4, 5 years, even 6 years for the completion of the merger. So imagine unbundling of all these things and changing the listings in various exchanges, etc. So I think I see this as a bizarre exercise, which is not going to produce any constructive, meaningful outcomes. By then, the government will change.
And Trump returns to the campaign trail in Ohio and calls Biden a total catastrophe. Biden is a puppet to a group of people. He doesn't know what the hell he signs, he says. And Trump himself is in looming trouble as his organization faces criminal charges in Manhattan. He is, however, expected to prevail, as is Rudy Giuliani, whose suspension will not stand per legal experts since no due process was followed. So now you can see that the Republicans are again regrouping and starting to go into the campaign mode perhaps for the 2022 midterm elections. And there were thoughts that Trump might actually run for the speaker. He might run for Congress and then he might try to become the speaker. But now I think he has shot that idea down. So where do you think stand now? Do you think the Republicans have found their feet now and they are beginning to walk again, sir?
I think the Republicans were yearning for a leadership and to get back to the public and start preparing for the 2022 midterm elections. That's their first objective. To win back House and Senate in the midterm elections is the first objective. While typically this happened during Obama time, the Democrats are focused on leveraging their majority to get the progressive agenda done before any perceptive changes that are likely to come out. So the Democrats are focused on making all those changes and within while they are at the helm of the government, while the Republicans are hungry and feel that it is time for them to hunt. So the Trump now has commenced the rallies in all the so-called where the battleground campaigns are likely to occur. They're targeting those weak Democratic candidate constituencies, and then going after, and that's where Ohio comes in. So the first campaign is Ohio. So there's going to be a series of campaigns that Trump would be launching. When you look at the audiences that turned up, it's quite stunning to say that this is not an election campaign. But having said that, that also shows the popularity of the man.
And Georgia vows to fight back as the Department of Justice sues to block voting changes. Viewers, this is not unusual at all. Center will sue states will sue back center. Both will go to the SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States, and some sort of a resolution is reached. So now the center is beginning to push back on Georgia. Again, as I've said all along, United States needs a consistent voting policy. It needs an election commission. It needs to use something like blockchain. Otherwise, this thing will keep on lingering. It's a lot of waste of taxpayers' money, according to me. Sir, your thoughts?
I think I agree with your sentiments. There has to be not only the reforms, but there's also to be the digitization of the voting technology. If you don't digitize, you're bound to have all these manual processes and potential opportunities for fraud. So Georgia reenacted with voter ID, and we have covered this, what the reenactment of the laws, and it was sent to Mr. Kemp, and Mr. Kemp signed it into a law. And you saw many organizations or many Democratic leading organizations opposed it. You also saw the MLB getting shifted. But now it is a law signed by the governor. So the Department of Justice says, how can you do this? Because this is not consistent with wide participation and denying the franchise to the legitimate voters. So this is Department of Justice position. I don't believe Department of Justice position is going to hold sway if it makes its way to SCOTUS.
And Florida's governor DeSantis says that 50 state officers will be helping with the United States-Mexico border crisis. I don't think Florida has a land border with Mexico, but I think they may be sending them to perhaps the neighboring state of Texas.
What has happened is there was no help forthcoming from the the
Biden administration?
the central administration, right? Be it CBP or therefore the Immigration Control Enforcement Authority (ICE) doesn't exist. So what they have done, so Republicans have said we'll hunker together. We have a common thinking and process. So Florida is one. I think Arizona has its own problems. There's, if I'm correct, Louisiana and as well as Mississippi. There's few red states have volunteered the police force and to be sent to the border to help Texas to combat, because Texas is where the maximum amount of infiltration is happening. It's also happening in Arizona, but the maximum is in Texas. So this is DeSantis saying, I'm giving 50 officers to help with dealing with the border crisis. And I think that is what is going on here. And just to complete that point, the VP also visited and made a statement. Hey, this is there is nothing to shout about here, and these are normal stuff that we have dealt with, etc. Remember, she's supposed to be in charge of the border crisis. This is Vice President Kamala Harris, and she's also supposed to be working very closely with the affected states in dealing with the issue. But as is often the case, these are more political rather than collaborative.
And labor shortages have sprung up in California and in Texas, and this is expected to continue because many people are getting their benefits and they don't have to go to work. And there has to be a mindset change before they start showing up at work. And I think if memory serves me correctly, California actually passed more laws to hold back, like for example, evictions till the end of September, which is okay. But see, this is a cycle here. If that doesn't open, then other things don't open, and therefore the labor doesn't feel like they need to go back to work. So this is an interesting cycle. I don't know how it's going to be broken, but we'll wait and see. And Oregon lawmakers have passed a bill to make illegal immigrants eligible for Medicaid. Democratic Governor Kate Brown is expected to sign this into law. Sir, this is another one where the taxpayer is going to pick up the bill.
Yeah, there are four essential elements, right? That's why this immigration or illegal surges or illegal immigration, it pops up. First and foremost, there seems to be no limits, and basically the whole thing is like a caboodle. The borders are open and there is a gush, number one. Number two, the second issue, who is bearing these transportation costs and housing and locating and all the issues surrounding the taxpayers? And they seem to be flowing into mainstream America, facilitated through process of aeroplanes, buses, and so on and so forth. Second, the third issue is how do you kind of fund these people? Okay, from New York to many of the Democratic states are saying they're going to tax people, and the tax money going towards paying on an average between $10,000 to $14,000 for each of these illegal migrants to settle down in this country, right? Including temporary housing. Then you have the fourth. You're beginning to see this unraveling of this, and that is Oregon is an example, is the healthcare. How do you provide health? Here you have normal people don't have healthcare, but these illegal migrants are going to be given or accommodated under the Medicaid healthcare scheme. So this, if you have one of the biggest challenges United States faces, apart from the blowing away of the budget, is this illegal immigration crisis around the taxpayers' money, around the security, around the employability within the ecosystem, because you're giving so many benefits and you got so many people, and all these people have to be served, and nobody wants to work.
And let's take a look at some news coming from India. Satellite images show that the Chinese and the Indian troops and tanks were within handshaking distance of each other last August. August 31st, 2020 was especially a special day. There's an article in Swaraja magazine which tells all the details of what had happened. So, your thoughts, how are things today compared to that?
Well, I think that they still first and foremost, the satellite images referred in that article will tell you very compelling position of how close and how significant the India-China situation was, how volatile it was. This was the time, if you recall, France, Britain, Israel, US all stood with India and basically said they will even have boots on the ground to support, and they will not allow China to invade. But India by itself, augmented itself, and it had full capability. A special team of commandos went in and occupied the Kailash Heights, giving them the strategic advantage. And then the Chinese rushed their tanks and people in. They're apparently no more than 400 feet. They can see each other at a handshaking distance. Where does the satellite images? If you recall, US and India signed what they call BEC, Bilateral Exchange Communication Service Agreement, which allows US satellites to provide data directly into the people who manage the security and border affairs in India. So a lot of information was gleaned by virtue of that access. But the point that we're trying to make is that they were so close. Has the positions changed? To some extent. But still, if you recall, we have covered in a DGI program that in certain positions they are not willing to renege and disengage, and so therefore both sides are holding position. So this will probably go on until one side blinks. I don't know which side. So far, both sides have not blinked.
And two drones were used for carrying out explosions inside Jammu Air Force Station's technical area. So far, there have been no damages. The National Investigative Agency is investigating the matter. Now, it is not clear if these drones came from across the border from Pakistan. This Air Force Station is about 14 kilometers from the international border. And at this point, I'm not sure if they've made any determination on where this has come from. Sir, do you have any updates on this?
It is alleged that it has come from the other side of the border. The other side of the border is fairly obvious to everybody. Apparently, the NIA or the army has been tracking drugs, arms, explosives, and such remote activated bombs for the first time were seen, where drones were used to instigate these incidents. Though this particular incident did not create any major damage, there's a genuine concern. I think either there has been two casualties. There was a mild explosion. This is not a military area. It is used for transportation, helicopters, transportation facilities. But the fact that two drones landed there and created a mild hiccup is a problem, and so the investigation is underway. They're not specific, but they do say that it has come from other side, and there has been several attempts for transportation of all those items that I mentioned. I'm sure we'll have more details soon.
Yes, sir. And India and Greece converge on the vision of free and open Indo-Pacific, with the Greek counterpart Nikon Dandias heeding to Dr. Jaishankar's request. Greece has also handed over the signed agreement to join the International Solar Alliance, of which India is the leader. And I'll also read one other item. India's renewable space energy witnessed over 70 billion investments in the last 7 years. And India has crossed, so this is all I have for solar energy. Sir, your thoughts? How significant is this India-Greece deal? The picture up, sir. Go ahead.
The significance is the significance of the deal can be explained in two ways. One is Greece is perceived to be China's ally. And so Greece provides access, potentially the Greek ports provide access and conduit for China into Europe. The fact that when Jaishankar was present, they handed over the agreement both for the ISA, International Solar Alliance, as well as an agreement to have an open, free Pacific is a reflection that on the diplomatic front, the India is slowly plugging away. So tomorrow, if China is threatening Greece in terms of its free passage into Europe, restricted passage where it controls, then at least India can say, hey, Greece, you basically helped us with the pro, so the same thing you can apply. So that's one facet of it. The second is that also France has been supporting Greece because you remember that there was this Cyprus issue, North and South Cyprus, where the Turkey took one side and then wanted to, threaten Greece. And then the French rushed their submarines as well as their attack naval ship. So therefore, the fact that France and India are working diplomatically with Greece is a significant development in the geopolitical context in terms of all these various battles that are going on with China.
And India crosses the 300 million COVID vaccine doses as the wave 2 appears to be contained. Sir, I have the dashboard with pictures on how many sites are conducting the vaccination and what is the total number of registrations, 340 million, total vaccination doses, 318 million. So I have that graphic, sir. Please go ahead.
Yes, I think that there are two key messages. First message is that data is further updated. So it's about 323, 324 million vaccine doses. And that simply implies that India has now gone past United States as the number one. I'm excluding China. Number one country in terms of the number of doses. With all the criticism India received, they're averaging between 5 to 6 million vaccination doses per day, and this kind of puts it into a very good position. 40 million people were vaccinated over 6 days. That's again a big number. That's first part. The second part is in terms of the active cases, where India has, if you remember, not too far ago, India had more than 4 million active cases. They brought it down to about 550, 560, and per day, average 50 to 60,000 cases are getting cured. So they are able to manage and come out of the wave 2. The next is, the last figure is, again, India had, wide advertisement, more than 4,000 people dying every day too. Now they've brought that number to about 1,000. So I think India is done well, having had hiccups as it started wave 2. And there's also now been attempts to prepare for wave 3. So this vaccination issue slowly is getting Indian government is getting a handle on, especially after they moved it to central distribution and central vaccination after initially faltering by giving it to the states.
And let's take a look at markets now. The S&P hits another record boosted by bank stress tests, infrastructural deal, low rates as we head into a new week. Sir, it looks positive now. Now, how is the inflation scenario looking, and what are your thoughts for this week as far as market is concerned?
I think we will continue to see the uptick in the markets. The inflation is the highest that we have ever seen. The central bank looks at inflation at 3.4%, but the markets look at inflation at 4.2%. Either way you calculate, is way above 2% or 2.4%. But it's an accommodative Fed and an accommodative Treasury. So the present low interest rate regime will prevail. But the good news is this, the Fed has said it is keeping a close eye. They may advance this accommodative policy to much more stringent by raising the rates in 2022 or 2023. In 2023, we may see 2 rate increases, but they may continue till 2022, these accommodative policies, basically because zillions of dollars is getting loaded And the new metric that the Fed is using is the ability to employ those who have been unemployed. Now, what is complicating the problem? Many people who can be employed are not getting back to work. So there is consistent unemployment levels on one side because they're all being given dole. Then you have the other side, the industry suffering from lack of people to get back to normalcy. This is a dichotomy that I don't know whether we're going to solve this problem, but with enough liquidity in the system and with a $6 trillion budget and deficits, all you can expect is the markets will continue to perform at a good velocity. I mean, as the Dow Jones was down last week, remember it was down 8.7 from 14. It's almost now back to normal. So within a week, you have seen the shifts of close to 6 to 7% movement in the annualized gains or Y2 year-to-date gains of a specific index. This is an unusual year where Dow has outperformed NASDAQ as well. And while this goes on, the oil prices continue to surge as economy comes back into normalcy. And people have been waiting for this to happen, and OPEC will step up the production, but also increase the price to make up for all the losses that prevailed over the past 12 or 14 months.
And with that, we bring today's DGI to a close. We'll be back again tomorrow, bright and early. Stay tuned. Do subscribe to our channel. Do consider joining membership of our channel. And we will be back with Ask Abhijit in about 2 hours time at 9 p.m. IST, 11:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Stay tuned and namaskar.
Namaskar. Thank you. Have a good day, and we'll see you tomorrow.